Okay, well, hi and welcome everyone to, this is the 5th Jurors Invitational. My name is Sean Barnes, and I'm the gallery director at Leonor R. Fuller Gallery here in the Kenneth J. Minark Center for the Arts at South Puget Sound Community College. And I just like to present an earnest reminder that South Puget Sound Community College sits on the ancestral lands of the Squaxin Island tribe and the Nisqually Indian tribe, who have long been stewards of the region's waters, plants, and animals. The southernmost point of the Salish Sea, these lands were and still are a place of gathering, trade, and community for most Coast Salish peoples. We recognize that all who are not Salish people are visitors here. We commit to join these peoples to share their history, build relationships, increase representation, and restore the living world around us. I'd just like to extend a few thank yous to the SPSCC Foundation and all of our special donors. Without you, we don't have any programming. We don't have artists here. I want to also thank Leonor R. Fuller for her continued support and contributions to the gallery, the SPSCC Board of Trustees, the Gallery Committee, with whom I coordinate with for all of our exhibitions and all of our programming, our incredibly hardworking artists, all of you here and past and future, and last but not least, my work studies, Sungi and Tim. They are the wheels that keep this place going online and install, and I couldn't do it without them. Just a couple of notes that we have a couple of exhibitions coming up right away that are student-oriented, and so be sure to come out for the collaboration installation. That opens May 9th and runs through May 13th. That's a week-long exhibition that includes that the art faculty invite an artist from the community to do a project with the students. So it's a very special exhibition where the students engage with a local artist, produce work with that artist, and install in the gallery. So they get to have a very real professional experience with working in a gallery space, consideration of the space, as well as having experience with materials and art concepts. Colleen Gallagher, who is ceramics art faculty here, will be working with visiting artist Reed Ozaki. And there's going to be a special component to this installation. Reed will work with the students on the ikebana technique of flower arranging with the ceramic pots that they make. And the community is welcome to come visit this installation, and that will begin at 9 a.m. on May 9th. And we'll have postings of this on our flyer and on social media as well. So if you all would like to come and watch students arrange their pots that they've made with Reed, or if you have any questions for Reed, he's a well-known ceramicist in the area, so stay tuned for that. The closing reception for that will be May 13th. And then we have the 17th annual student art exhibition, and that will run May 23rd to June 17th. And then shortly after that is the Southwest Washington Regional Juried Art Exhibition. And this year, that exhibition is juried by Erin Dinjarink. Erin is an artist living and working out of Vancouver. Erin she's the program coordinator for the Low Residency Program at Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland. She's also a curator for the Washington State Arts Commission and director of BTW MoMA. That stands for By the Way Museum of Mini Art. And entries for the Southwest Juried Show is coming up really quick. Those entries are due May 6th. And for the artists that are here in the gallery tonight, I have the prospectus up at the desk if you have any questions about that. But you can register online at our website. So I think that's all I've got. Let's get started. Yeah, okay. Well, tonight I have the great pleasure of welcoming artists Terry Bevilacqua, Doyle Fanning, Carrie Larson, Jennifer Lauer, Susan Pavel, and Carla Fowler. And so let's give them a little round of applause again. So unfortunately we have one mic this evening, so and so we're going to be passing this mic around. I'm going to kick things off with a question, and after we talk for about a half an hour or so, the artists talking together, then we'll open up to the gallery for if anyone has any questions or comments or anything like that. So, while you're sitting here listening, look at the work, listen to what we're saying, kind of ruminate on what's happening here, and if you maybe come up with a question that could get the artists thinking a little more deeply about their work, or inspire them to push in a certain direction. Sometimes that happens. Happens to me anyway. Okay, so I'm going to keep it. I am a process artist myself, and I'm always excited about knowing the process for artists, how they work, what they work with. Sometimes that may be in the form of a ritual in the studio. How do you get things going? How does a piece begin? Right? So I just want to open this up, and so without calling on any one of you, which I'm not afraid to do. If one of you, okay, Terry, thank you for stepping forward. So yeah, just if you could talk a little bit about your process.
I have a full-time job. I have to talk about that. Sorry.
I have a full-time job that is not being an artist. So my process involves finding time. A lot of that is just finding time. And when I find the time, I go into the studio. I turn off the outside world most of the time and do whatever I need to do to adjust my head to be out of there and into there, and warm up the hot plate. That's about a 2-hour process, so then I can collage and stuff for a while, just in acrylic, and get started, and start with the wax.
So, what is a hot plate?
Well, the hot plate. So I paint in an encaustic, which is a wax-based medium that has to be heated up. So I have an old, it's old because I've had it for a long time. It's an old printing hot plate, and if anybody has any printing history when we used chemicals and all those great things, that you need a hot plate for that. And I heat up little tubs of encaustic wax on there. It looks like a painter's palette, only it has little containers of wax. It smells really good. It's beautiful.
Thanks. Like Terry, I'm always looking for a quiet time. So I have a husband and a dog, and and that means when they go to bed, I'm up late. Fortunately, I stay up routinely till 2 o'clock in the morning easily, so I sleep in until 9 or 10. And so when they go off to bed, then I have the house to myself, and it's quiet. And I usually start by going on the computer, because I do digital work, and I start going through photographs, or I'll remember something that someone said. One night, I looked at a magazine just as I was kind of closing the door to the den, and it said, "In the Night Garden." And I went in and I started looking for photographs, and I made a print called "In the Night Garden," and it just came together really quickly. Other times I'll play around with things for hours and days, and sometimes months, and nothing happens. I take a lot of photographs. I photograph just about anything that's interesting to me. Grease stains on my garage floor, clouds. I have a snapshot, one of my pictures here, the floral drift, was just a snapshot out of the window of my car of some dried grass and some flowers. And I found it while I was cleaning out my files, and I started working with it, and it became something. The other thing is I've been working a lot lately with this with this space, this 1-to-3 proportion space, and trying to figure out ways to fill it that are interesting and, have energy to them. So that's how I work. And then I go to bed really, really late. Or early.
I guess as far as my process, a lot of times it always will start with an idea, and I don't keep a sketchbook per se. It's more of a notebook where I'm writing things down, so it often starts text-based, and I kind of build from there, get some ideas down, keep revisiting it. Sometimes the ideas just sort of haunt me, so trying to go about my other business and my side hustle, what have you, and those, it just keeps tugging at me until it becomes a little more fully formed, and then I'll start putting things together, sketching things out a little more thoroughly. Other times I will, because I work with paper quite a bit, just start laying paper out. So if I have a sense of where I'm going visually, start playing with the color palette that way. That's kind of the beginnings.
So my work is over here. I have several different ways of working, but one of the things I've been really interested in lately is drawing and using that as a way to sort of record the sensation and emotion of whatever it is that hits me when I'm out and about walking or just struck by something in my environment. And so I'll, do lots of little drawings, and then sometimes from that I'll develop that into a small painting, and then perhaps scale it up, like this middle painting, the large one here, is something that was, first a 8x10 drawing, and then a small painting, and then was scaled up into that portion. So I'm interested in representing color through sort of unconventionally through the medium of drawing, because it allows you to kind of record the sensation of what you're experiencing through touch. It's not a fixed thing like a photograph, so you can kind of put things where you want to be in the scale and proportion that you want them, and that's sort of the beginning.
My name is Susan, and I'm the weaver. That's the Coast Salish style of weaving. And I don't know how to answer this question. Because I think about the weavings that are in here, and I think about the weavings that have been done, and I think they're always for someone or something. So my process starts with somebody else. So what do I have on the loom now? I'm thinking, okay, what's on the loom right now? Or what did I just start working up just 2 nights ago? And we have some Puyallup graduates who are graduating in their medical and health field, and the Puyallup people want to honor these graduates with weavings and headbands, and so I'm weaving to honor these graduates. And then the other loom, there's like 3 projects going. Then another loom has a weaving that a gentleman would like something, and he articulated his desire and his need for this weaving I just loved that he gave me the artistic freedom. I imagine all of you here have done something where you had a client or somebody who wanted something, and as sexy as commission is, I don't know. YouTube world and people in the audience, it's hard. I would rather just create, and if you love it, you buy it or trade me for something. But to really try to get into the mind's eye of someone else, I actually had to give someone back $1,000 because they gave me a down payment for something, and he was in New York, and I'm really off topic. And we went, so this is the process. Well, I'm doing it. This is the process. I'm doing the right process. And after a year of going back and forth and him, and this is before the internet, and this is before phones, and take a picture, and this is what you want. After a year, I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm going to refund you your money. This is not working, and I had to stop. So I guess my process is inspired by either somebody in the world needing to have something, because the weave style wasn't art for art's purpose. Weaving was, and still is, because we're trying to honor somebody in their walk of life. The weavings in here, this one back here was inspired by moss. It was a winter day and I was walking out and it was very cold and this vibrant, beautiful green moss was showing up through the sidewalk. The one with the tree line, we do cold water swims, and on a particular cold water swim, the water was glistening, and it was out at Elk Inlet here. And I could see the tree line, and it was just really inspiring at that point. And then these little bags were because I wanted to show shape, the different design elements. So I guess maybe my process starts with purpose.
Well, I have different ways of starting actually, but my motivation is usually based on photographs that I've taken over the years. My husband and I participate in a number of events in Puget Sound area and along the coast, and I'm constantly taking pictures. And while in some cases I'm taking those photographs to document the event or something, I'm always looking for art inspiration. And so I'm taking pictures of weird things that a lot of other people kind of wonder what I'm doing. So I've got thousands of photographs, many of which I've taken for purposes of eventually doing a painting. So when I want to get started on something new and I don't have anything in mind, I go to the computer and I start going through the photographs and figuring out which of these inspire me today. And so then I will set up the paints, fill up the water jar. I work in acrylics and charge in on usually I'll be working on 3 or 4 paintings at a time, so I will have selected more than one subject. Normally they'll be related, but yeah. But that's how I usually get started.
Did this spark any questions that any of you might have for someone else? Yeah.
No, but I do want to say something about, because this is how the process works, right?
Yeah.
I was down in California last weekend, and it was 6 in the morning. No, it was even earlier. It had to be 5 in the morning. And the Uber driver is driving me to the airport, and I saw this person under the overpass with the spray can, and it was a blank canvas. It was blank. In that moment, I felt creation. I got it. I got why people do art. Because he had this blank canvas in front of him. And I don't like tag stuff, but there are some very beautiful things that people have done on the sides of buildings. And I got it in that moment. And just when you were speaking about your pictures and when I was listening to you, I thought, everybody wants to create. We all have some need to be connected to creation. And it was a delight. I saw it. In that moment, I saw it. The man with the spray can.
The man with the spray can.
The man with the spray can.
Yeah, I agree. There's, it's like, and I think all artists share that, and the skills and the techniques and all of that comes with so much practice and work and training and experience. But if there is one single thing that we have innately in some way, for whatever reason, it's that urge to create. And I wonder sometimes if that comes from absence, or or lack, or like I don't know, but like, because I feel that too. It's like I look at a blank page, and I remember being much younger and sometimes being intimidated by that page, that empty surface, but still having that urge to fill it or bring something into the world. And I think when we do that, when we talk about purpose and community in making, that's kind of a catalyst to bring people together, right? Where it can play a role in that in some way. And
I said that as well.
So what you're saying about practice got me wondering if the rest of you have had this experience where a lot of what I do doesn't work out, and there's a lot of things that just go wrong. And I've really just come to live with the idea that not everything I do is great. In fact, some of it's not very good at all. But I'm learning something. Everything I do is learning something. So I'm just wondering, do the rest of you?
And you and I were just talking about that my studio, Doyle asked me if these were all new work. And that's really a hard question for me to answer. Anybody that's been in my studio, the middle painting, these paintings are mine over here, and the middle painting over there of the first three, that's been going on, I think that the back of that says from 2008 or something, or 11, I can't remember what it's, but they sit around for a long time, and because they're really gross for a while, and maybe I don't ever want to look at them again, and then 5 years later I pull them out from behind something like, oh, why did I put this back here? Yeah.
Speak to that a little bit too. Is sometimes it's also something goes haywire in what I'm trying to do, and then it becomes a really interesting problem to solve. And that's a part of the process that I find really rewarding. Is a challenge or an obstacle in the way. You start to look at the piece differently. You've got a new way of coming at it, and then something unexpected results, and that's really satisfying.
Sometimes it's really good.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I did a piece one time where I was working on this piece, and this image just kept popping into it, and I kept throwing it out, and I kept popping into it, and I kept throwing it out, and finally I said, what do you want? And it just said it wanted something else, and so I threw everything else away, and I worked with it, and it came to be a really nice piece, but it wasn't because I was, somehow it just kept coming, and it wouldn't settle down. It just wouldn't leave me alone.
My piece in the middle there, Vespers, is one that I was, it probably was in process for 9 months or more. And, even though it started from a small painting, it had its own process of evolution. And, a lot of it, after sort of getting the initial areas of color down, I have to sit back and watch it and listen to what it wants from me. So it becomes more of a sort of a conversational relationship with the work. So yeah, I guess that doesn't really, I think the original question had something to do with things that don't work out. In this case, I feel like it worked out. But in lots of cases, I have paintings that sit in the studio, and they may be there for years. And maybe I'll come back to them. Maybe they'll talk to me later. But definitely multiple failures all the time. It's probably 75%.
And this idea of listening to the painting and listening to the work.
Yeah, I think that this question's come up before in art talks, and a conversation around what the work needs, or what it's saying to us, or and we have to make these choices, right? And how to solve a problem, but how does it go from being one size to another, right? Or it's okay, it works at a certain scale, and then what is that decision to, okay, well maybe it needs to be bigger, right? But I'm wondering, this conversation, Susan, how does that work with weaving? I mean, I understand with painting, collage, you know, it's like, okay, you can, but does that happen with the weaving? It's like, oh, this is not going where I wanted it to. And then what do you do? I mean, because there's a lot of strands and the warp and weft, right? But, yeah.
Can things become something else?
It's got to be something. Sometimes they turn into, sometimes I keep them as teaching, because I teach. So this is an example of what not to do. This is what happens when you do this. Thinking about it, me and my master teacher were experimenting with this, trying to recreate this vest that we had found in a museum, the Field Museum in Chicago. And boy, it was all sorts of crazy before we could finally figure out how to do that. And so it turned into different things for different people. And so maybe it was like a little baby vest for somebody, and maybe this vest actually never fit anybody, and it just sat on the mannequin thing. But if they have been mistakes, what was actually going through my mind when you guys were all talking is that the life of it needed to go somewhere else. And because all weavings are alive and they have a trajectory somewhere, they're going to go somewhere. And maybe whatever I thought was the presentation of that it didn't need to go there. It needed to go over here. And I see very clearly, it had to go here, even though I thought it was supposed to go there. So there's an ongoing relationship there.
I think one of the challenges, in my case, painting, is deciding what to leave in, what to take out, what needs to be moved around. And sometimes that's a case of just playing with it and trying some things out and see what works and what doesn't. And there's plenty of things that don't work.
Does anybody have anything else about process?
I guess I'm a little curious to ask Carla, just like since you're working from photographs and listening to what you're saying about moving things around, and I'm just like wondering if you feel like you're able to be flexible in your painting process using a photographic reference, or if that inhibits you at all. Because for me, that sometimes dictates to me a little too much, which is why I tend to work from drawing.
And that's a really good question. In distant past years, I tended to be more of a slave to the photo than I should have been. And that's one thing I've learned over the years, is to be much more flexible. Look at it, decide what inspires me from that photo, and how can I best reflect that in a painting. And often it's a case of literally leaving some stuff out. A couple of these paintings I left things out, others I moved things around. And so I'm not always following exactly what's there. I'm trying to find the inspiration that was in that photo, and make sure I can communicate what I was hoping to get out of it actually when I originally shot it. And often I'm changing colors, I'm making things brighter, making things lighter, darker, changing light sources. Whatever needs to happen to make it do what I feel like I want it to do.
So I'm going to double down on this question. I want to take this question deeper because there's something, to use it's become a popular term in the past 4 or 5, 6 years. So that's got me thinking about all of you in terms of this idea of being restrained or constrained by our source, right? Or where we're drawing inspiration, or how our methodology. And I think also for Susan, just moving like between tradition or the rules of a particular way of making, or particular histories behind a material, and then to taking creative license. And the reason why I mentioned Susan is because there are rules to certain designs and presentation that are tied to ceremony and family, and so maybe you guys can all talk about that. And in Caustic, with you especially, there's no rules.
I got no rules. I got no stinking rules.
But yeah, maybe I'll just start with Susan.
When I first started, I remember thinking, and I still am to a certain degree, I like the rules. I like that it's actually a grid. I mean, weaving is a grid. It's a grid, you're on a grid. And I like that, because I don't want every single choice in the world. That's just too many choices for me. Just give me a grid and I can do something left to right. And go from there. And I don't need much more than that, I guess. I can play with color, and I can play with shape and size and that sort of thing. If it's very specific for a ceremonial purpose, the act of weaving is the relationship between me, the person, and the materials, and the spirit behind that. And so that kind of relationship, and it's always a relationship, is profound and deep, and there's a lot of reward in that. And I'm very much constituted as service. I'm of service, and so I willingly give myself over to that. So there's that kind of that arena, and then there's the other arena of just a fun artistic wall hanging that isn't necessary, like the one over there, or these two really. Inspired by something happening out, usually in the environment, is what that is. So I actually kind of like the constraint myself.
I have a rule.
I do have material rules. Like, I mean, I have to fuse everything together. When I put paper down, I have to make sure all the air bubbles are out of there. So those kinds of things I have to pause for. But there's no photograph, there's no those kinds of rules. So it's a different kind of rule.
I like rules too. I think they give you structure, and but I always like to push them a little too, and try and find out what I can do within it. I always think about Chuck Jones, the guy who created Roadrunner cartoons. He said he had rules. It took a heartbeat for the to fall down and blow up, so boom, it was a heartbeat, and that was a rule that he had. And so he had to be exactly 3 minutes. And those rules, then within those rules, he could be as creative as he wanted. And that somehow stimulated his creativity, because like you say, Susan, it wasn't like you could just do anything. You had to work within that framework. So my rules change from time to time, but right now one of my rules is this space that I'm working with. I'm not going to go outside that space, and I'm not going to push that space. And so what can I do in that space? And I've been working with that space for well over a year now. And I'm still fascinated with what I can do within that very limited space. So for me, it's a shape, and what can I do in that? And also, Sean, I just wanted to mention, as I was sitting here looking at this is all women's work, and it's all about the environment, and yay for Earth Day.
So, going back to Doyle real quick, so this space that you speak of is this horizontal rectangle?
This horizontal rectangle, Arthur Wesley Dow, from University of Chicago, talked about taking a space and then trying to fill it in some way that was interesting. And you know, you can just have endless ways of filling a space. And so that's my ruler. I mean, that's the thing that I'm working with right now. That's the limits. And within that space, I can do just about anything and have. And sometimes it doesn't work. But when it does work, it's just thrilling.
Because when I'm working two-dimensionally, a lot of times, much like Doyle, I will start with parameters of a particular shape and then work on my balance and forms and patterns within that. And it does help for me to have that kind of constraint.
Trying to think if I have rules that I'm bound to. And the only thing I'm coming up with is palette. And it's not really a rule so much as like just following what works and what doesn't work. So that sort of by necessity limits my palette sometimes. You know, I can't just throw a random color in there. It has to. I can. But then, you know, the pink will probably break apart and no longer hold together. So, I mean, it's sort of like intrinsic rules that I follow somewhat intuitively, maybe, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm coming up with the rules question.
About that. Also, I think if you look around the room at everyone's work, there's a particular vocabulary that each of us speak in. So we have kind of our own set of rules that having to do with that vocabulary that allows us a lot of creativity within that, but it's our language that we're speaking. Right, right.
I think certainly there are classic rules of composition, which I rely on frequently and break occasionally. And then, like color combinations, complementary colors. I love to use complementary colors and really get some more vibrance to the work. But you know, a lot of that is really all about playing with these things sometimes and just seeing what happens and trying to make something happen that really helps fulfill the intent, the purpose, the kind of motivation, the inspiration that is going into the piece. I've been interested in playing with kind of abstraction of reality, or abstract reality, I guess is a phrase I've thought about it. But that's where you take something real and see what nature has done to it. And that's where playing with rust, for instance, or weather-beaten wood, moss, we're both inspired by moss. And just seeing how the abstract becomes reality in the way that nature has changed a man-made object or structure or something.
As you were talking, I was reminded of something Helen Frankenthaler, abstract artist, said once about paintings that, you know, she would push a painting to the point, just to the point where it would almost break, where it would completely come apart. And I was thinking about that with your comments about painting, and you know that she has a story about a painting that she was working on, and she worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, and then was, you know, she left it and had dinner, and while she was eating, she thought, oh, well, all this needs is a little bit of green. I think I'm just gonna, and she went back into the studio, put the green in, and it wrecked the entire painting, and that was it. But then you move on, right? And then you go to the next one. And so I think, you know, oftentimes with art, you know, those rules are so important, but we do have to like push against them just so. And I think that's when things start to really work too. Is push those rules and let them expand a little bit into the invisible. Is there anything about that? Yeah.
I always feel like encaustic gives you kind of a cheating in that regard, because when I get to the point where, oh, why is that all pink now? Or, why did I paint that whole painting that color? What the heck? Or I wake up the next day and I'm like, what the heck happened in here last night? And but encaustic, I can heat it all up and melt it down. I can scrape back. I can go back to, like, if I don't like that whole pink painting, I can go back to what it was before by scraping it off. So, and sometimes that's just part of the process, is deconstructing it to reconstruct it. But I always feel like that's a little cheating with encaustic. Is like, I can do that.
Well, and now that you mention that, I mean, I work in digital, and so I can go back. You know, I can try something and it doesn't work, and I can go back. And then I can try something else and I can go back. And so there's always the original image that I can go back to and then move it forward. But I like the idea, Shauna, of pushing it to the edge, you know, and sometimes it crashes, you know, and then I have the luxury of being able to pull it, usually being able to pull it back, sometimes not, and then rework it until it becomes just right. You know? So that's a gift of the digital world. But I also do a lot of paper cutting, because when you can't cut paper, you don't have that. You know, once it's cut, it's cut.
See, that's what I was telling you guys. It's like one question, and then it just everything kind of grows. That's what I love about this format, because it's a conversation. I have a whole bunch more questions here, but that we could dive into. But it's 6:45
Oh my God.
already.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
Fun, huh? So I'm going to save a question or two for later, but does anybody in the gallery have a question for these artists? Yeah. Let me give you this microphone and so you can talk, and just hold it.
So, out of all the groupings, I liked everything, but of course I found my favorite in each group, but we don't have that kind of time, so. But the one over here, it's something about waiting for the last golden buffalo. Is that right? Who did that one?
Yeah.
That is amazing. And you know, just the way my eye took me, it took me a really long time to even find what I thought was the shape of buffalo. I'm like, oh, that's it. No, it's that. And there were so many things about it that were so interesting that I didn't catch the first time I saw it. And, you know, I came in another time, and now today, and I'm like, I didn't even see this, and this just became very interesting. And then there was just something very magical about that moment, you know. I found the buffalo. And then it's like, why is it the golden buffalo, and why is she waiting? And I love everybody else's work too, but we don't have that kind of time, so.
Was that a question?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I hope that you can hear me. I just want to say to Doyle, I love your work. I've been seeing you many times here in this gallery and in other venues. And when I came here last week and I saw your bio, and I read it, and I'm so impressed with the fact that you worked in state government for so many years, and you had this craving to create, and you had the courage to move beyond that and follow this dream of yours, and really become an exceptional artist. You may have been all along, but certainly I wasn't aware of that, so now I am. So, and that's what I want to say.
Thank you.
This piece here Yeah, the sculpture. Did you consider the tree rings?
Did I consider the tree
Yeah.
rings in the process?
Yeah,
Yeah, in terms of them as a pattern, I guess. So it just adds to the textural elements of the piece itself, and it references the trees, which I was, thinking about the tree canopy when that was kind of the impetus for the work itself. So.
They tell the story of the history of the tree.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm curious about how artists can paint up close to their image, and it's different if you stand back. Like I'm looking at, is it Janice? Jennifer. Your images, when I look up close, I see lots of the color, but back here, I can see, yep, that's what it looked like this morning, or, I remember seeing that. It's a different image. And the same with, is it Karen? Carta? It's three-dimensional, some of your objects from here, but up close, I don't see that. How do you do it? Do you have to step back and come back and forth?
Constantly.
I stand when I paint, so I don't sit, and that's exactly why I need to do that, because I'm always stepping back and looking at it, and then looking at it from different angles as well. And then you do have to be up close to actually do the painting. But it does make a difference, and it really has influenced some of what I've done on paintings.
It's pretty much the same answer. It's a good question. I almost don't know how to answer because it's kind of mysterious to me too, and I can't look at other people's work. But yeah, I set my working surface like as far away from me as I can get, and I spend a lot of time looking. And then you do a few moves on the painting, and then you step back and you watch and see what happens. So as far as the process, sounds pretty similar.
And another thing I'll do frequently is move it, take a painting up to the living room and have it sitting there, or some other location where I'm looking at it in a totally different context and different light as well. Because that sometimes helps me see something that isn't working or that is working or whatever.
I have somebody else's answer. A friend of mine, she's 2D, and she puts it on the floor on a Lazy Susan.
Okay.
And so she gets multiple angles off of that.
Pro tip, right there.
That's not mine, because I don't do it that way, but my friend does.
I look in the mirror, look in the reverse, I take black and white photos, I take color photos. Even just a color photo, it looks very different than looking at the painting itself. So it often, you'll see areas that are not working or things stand out.
And it's also a matter of scale. So something small up close and then at a distance will look very different. And then if you blow it up big, you have a totally different relationship with it. So some of this is, I think, all of us, is trying to figure out the right scale for whatever it is we're doing. Is it large enough, small enough? So I do that even with my digital work. I will look at it from a long distance and decide whether or not it needs to be small or very large or somewhere in between, because that really affects how you see it.
My things hang on the wall a lot, and when they first start out, they are in every different direction, upside down. And a lot of my paintings, sometimes, depending on where they go, will hang in a different direction on a different day.
And
Two of them are wired double, aren't they?
what's that?
Are two of those wired double, actually?
Yeah, like wired going this way and this way. But you also have had, like, for some of your work, and I think one or two of these, right? Like the desert.
Oh yeah, so
You had a lot of space.
I have taken a couple of times art out to the desert, out to Black Rock City, and 3 of these paintings were part of a billboard. So I have made these billboards that imagine like a fruit stand billboard as you're driving down the highway. And the last one was 10 24 by 24 panels, and the 3 24s were part of that billboard. And they went to the desert for 2 weeks out in the desert, and then they came home, and I actually put it back up at home, and they actually, here's the interesting thing about encaustics, they sat outside for like 3 days in the rain, and then they went back in the studio, and I've been reworking those 10 paintings, and they're finally, I only have one more that I feel like needs to keep being reworked. Yeah, and so they were in different, they were completely different. And the 10 buffalo, the Waiting for the Last Golden Buffalo was actually upside in a different direction at that point. But so much of it wasn't, that you see now wasn't what it was. I'd be happy to show you a photograph of it.
Yeah, one of my pieces in the show I had for months, and I think I wrote about how I had it for months, and it wasn't until I flipped it upside down that it worked. So, clearly, orientation can be just huge. I mean, and it was an accident. I thought, what the hell? I tried everything else. So it was an accident, but then it was just like, bam, now it works.
Any other questions from the gallery? Okay.
So I've got one question, and this is going to be for all of you again. And this, maybe this will be the last actual question, but we can keep talking, till 7:30 or so. We can also mingle and whatever. But which one do I want to do? Okay, so just leaping off of what Terry was saying about being in the desert, being in these different spaces, and your work actually being in the rain. So the first part of the question is basically, you're all kind of drawing inspiration from the natural world, right? And so how often is it a direct inspiration from something in the natural world, like a particular place or a landscape? And how often is it just responding to the formal elements in an art piece, like line, shape? Or in what ways does, which comes first? Is it the natural world, or is it... Does that make sense?
The inspiration has to come first, and then to try to figure out how to use the line, shape, to capture it, to reflect what the inspiration is.
And translate it in some way.
Yeah, translate's probably a good word, but it's a real challenge to be able to reflect it the way you want to when you're having to use these materials, brushes, whatever, and try to capture what it was about that scene or that object that inspired you.
Right, so that's kind of
my question, because like with your work, I mean, with the exception of this one right behind you with the moss on the pilings, most of these are very close-up examinations. And so they're not these grand vistas, the landscapes. And then like with Terry's, which way is it coming? Is it that you see something most often, or is it that you have an idea about what you're seeing? You say, okay, that's why that works.
Does that make sense? So is it the rust, or is it that the thing is rusted and it's old?
Well, both can apply, but in like these particular pieces, it was the extreme close-up of the rust and the abstract kind of color pattern, texture is something I particularly like. But there's also the wider scene that it came from, originally. And that would be a different kind of painting, still be trying to reflect that element, but then it's in a larger context of a waterfront scene or something like that. But for these particular pieces, I was more interested in going for the extreme detail, close-up sense. But
I almost want you to ask the question again.
Yeah, so,
Sorry.
With the information, or, the inspiration, I mean, they're referencing the natural world,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
is the information coming, how often does, or in what ways does it come from the natural world, or does it come through, like, the patterns and the palette of the natural world? Or is
Okay,
it
so both.
deeper?
That's why it's a tough question for me, because I'm looking at the work on the wall here, and there's sort of 3 different ways of working in this group, just in this group of 7 paintings or whatever. So 2 of them are direct paintings that are painted on site. So obviously very referential to the natural world in front of me, but they're also kind of a springboard to something that's not actually there, but something that I feel is there, if that makes sense. And then the small square paintings, those are all imaginative, actually. They're, memory, emotion, but not referencing anything that I'm looking at specifically. They're sort of something I'd like to see, I guess. Something that I've seen before, maybe. And then the big piece, I can talk about that a few times, but in that case, it's sort of through that process of like being out in the world and being hit by something, and then trying to record that information, and then in this case through drawing and then painting it out. I don't know if that answers completely. Okay.
And I try to think of these questions a lot of times as exploring the question,
Yeah.
right? Or just examining it through a question, rather than, there's no right answer.
I think in my work, it's much like you're saying here, it's kind of all those elements, or for the particular piece it depends, but most of the time I'm outside a lot, walking, hiking, whatever, and absorbing these impressions from the natural world, and sometimes it is texture and pattern of rust or moss growing on sidewalk cracks, what have you, and it's sort of filtering that through whatever thought process is to shape these abstract pieces. So yeah, it's kind of all there.
I've been thinking a lot lately about the rhythm and patterns of nature. So I take photographs, and what I'll do is I'll just see something, and I don't know why I'm taking the photograph. I'm just taking the photograph. And then when I work with it, I begin to see that there's rhythm and pattern that nature has that I could not imagine actually being able to do myself, So what I'm trying to do, I think, is just reveal those patterns and that rhythm of nature. And for me, increasingly, it's just getting out of the way. Just getting out of the way and letting whatever that pattern or rhythm is emerge in the image and on the paper. And so that means really just stepping back and letting it be whatever. And it's like we've been talking before about listening, listening to the work. What is nature saying in this particular piece? And so I feel increasingly like I'm not doing it. The work is doing itself and emerging, and that feels good to me. It feels appropriate. Like a conduit, yes, like a conduit.
I also take a bazillion pictures, and so my paintings, just, I don't know, it goes back and forth. Like what sometimes the human mess, as far as architecturally things we've made, that kind of thing, will catch my fancy, and that will be sort of where I start to focus. I have minimal Photoshop skills, so being able to print things out that I've taken photographs of, creating silhouettes or specific items, that comes from being out in the world, and whether that's hiking up in the mountains, hiking on the beach, whether that's walking through a city, or just driving around sometimes. And many of those photographs, I'm sure like everybody else, your photographs, they don't make it into the art, but they are going back and looking at that period of time. I can absolutely think about paintings and where they have evolved and how they've evolved. Well, I've spent time looking through photographs from a period of time or from a trip. And sometimes I'm really brilliant to put all of certain kinds of photographs into a file and forget about them because it made sense in that moment, but it doesn't make sense to go look for that file again, because why would I have named it that? And those are really great files because they're things that are not connected, but they were connected in some moment for me, putting those in there. So the art comes from that history coming back and forth to me.
And okay, well, if anybody has a question from the gallery, okay, well, is it okay if we end it here?
Yeah. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you all so much for sharing all of this, and thank you all for coming. This will conclude the talk. You're welcome to hang out and mingle for a little bit.